Hello and welcome to the fourth edition of the AviaDev Insight Africa Connectivity Update for 2025, offering your deep dive into the route developments to, from, and within the African continent. I'm your host, Jon Howell, CEO and founder of AviaDev Africa. We are a platform dedicated to supporting fleet and network development to, from, and within the sub-Saharan African continent. So, as always, we've got a packed agenda this month and a real variety of routes and topics to dive into. So, to kick us off, I will now introduce your in-house experts and protagonists. So, last month, those of you who are regular listeners understood that I played with ChatGPT and quite enjoyed it. So this month, I thought I'd stretch its bounds and have another go. I asked it to provide an introduction to each in the style of the president of the USA, Donald Trump. I'm not doing the voice, but you'll definitely pick up some of the intonations for no other reason than we thought this would be a bit of fun, or I did anyway. Let's go. Here we go. Ladies and gentlemen, let me tell you about somebody tremendous. A guy who knows more about planes than Boeing and Airbus combined. His name, Behramjee Ghadially. He's been consulting with airlines for years, helping them launch routes, cut losses, and boost profits. Big profits, by the way. You should see the numbers there. They're fantastic. They're amazing. Yeah, welcome, Behramjee. Hope you enjoyed that. I cut it down a little bit.
Trump's voice.
Yeah, no, I don't think I
Behramjee, what's the last airline you worked for that actually made a profit? What's the last airline that actually made a profit?
The one that matters, net profit. Stop bullying.
Net profit was Aricare in 2014 and 2013.
This isn't a great CV. Let's move on. That's 10 years ago.
It was stolen. The profits, they were stolen.
That is a different story, but profit is profit.
Profit is profit. Right. Okay, let's move on before the litigation. I can feel it. So now for Sean's treatment. Now let's talk about a guy doing huge things in African aviation. And let me tell you, he's not just another consultant. Huge. He's a genius, okay? Big brain, huge knowledge. Genius. I should know. I've got a big brain. Smart people in the industry, they know him. The others, they go bankrupt. It's sad. It's so sad. Please welcome a man making airlines great again, Mr. Sean Mendis, our chief troublemaker. Welcome,
Sean.
Sean.
I like that. Making airlines great again. I think I'm going to have that on my next business card.
You mean on the next red hat that you get? We'll get you one made for AviaDev.
Well, yes, I should do red hats and give them out with making airlines great again. Thank you. There's a good marketing tagline.
There you go. I think everybody's rushing now to the stores to get those made. But yeah, apologies for that. But I just thought I'd have a bit of fun. And any suggestions on different styles or different things that you'd like us to do going forward? Because I did realize we were going over old ground over the months, and we know we have loyal, dedicated listeners. So I thought we'd try something a bit different. We're going to get into it now. But obviously, as always, before we start, I have to say with the disclaimer that the opinions of my guests are, of course, their own. But as you will hear today, they are backed up, as always, with compelling reasoning and data. So now it is time to fasten your seatbelts and we will taxi out for this month's connectivity update. All right, topic is Ethiopian. Let's get them out the way in a way because they are always a topic of conversation. So we thought we'd put them right at the top. There's a couple of big ones that we're going to dive into. The first one, because it follows hot on the heels of last month, we were talking about what Ethiopian were doing with Etihad and going into Abu Dhabi. And they have announced flights to Sharjah, of course, again in the UAE. They are going to start 4 weekly flights using the 737 MAX from the 1st of June, so not that far away from now. And so I think this fits quite nicely into our wider conversation about access to the UAE market.
Okay. I think this is something we are not at all surprised about. When you heard us talking over the last 2 months, we've discussed Ethiopia to the UAE market, and we said that I said I wouldn't be surprised to see Abu Dhabi. Behramjee said he wouldn't be surprised to see Sharjah. Surprise! Neither of us are surprised. We've seen both Abu Dhabi and Sharjah announced, which now is effectively going to be Ethiopian operating 5 times a day between Addis Ababa and the UAE. So I don't think the Sharjah is daily yet, but I expect to see it become daily, maybe even before it launches, but basically as soon as they can get those slots. This is going to be a daily 4 or 5 weekly 737 MAX 8 for now. But as like everything with Ethiopian, especially on turnaround flights to the Gulf where there's no crew layover or anything, you get basically whatever the capacity demands at the time. So it's quite possible that a MAX would be sent to somewhere else instead, and they would swap in a 787, 777, or any other aircraft type effectively that they can put onto that route. Will fly it instead of a MAX if demand should require it. Sharjah is effectively, Dubai North. Sharjah Airport is closer to many parts of Dubai than Dubai Airport is. It's closer to the parts of Dubai that the African community tends to
Exactly.
frequent, which is right on the border between Dubai and Sharjah. So this is an absolute no-brainer flight. The only catch they have with Sharjah is that obviously interline opportunities are not there. ET pushes a lot of traffic through DXB Airport, interlining with Air India to destinations in South India, interlining with PIA to destinations in Pakistan, and so forth. And all that traffic goes through DXB. Sharjah is going to be pretty much entirely catering to the O&D market for the Dubai area. But that market is, from Africa as a whole, that market is 1 million plus passengers a year. This is we said it last month. There is effectively infinite demand from different parts of Africa into the UAE, and ET is having to effectively to seize their share of the pie.
Yeah, perfect. Anything you want to add, Behramjee, that Sean hasn't covered?
Just the fact that the timings are its traditional overnight bank timings.
Yeah.
So basically, to the greater Dubai area, you have 3 flights departing within an hour of each other. The 2 Dubai flights depart at 10 o'clock, at quarter to 10 and quarter to 11, whereas this flight is departing just after 10 o'clock. So from June 15th, I think it is starting from, hold on one second.
June 1st, I've got.
June 1st. So
From
if you don't get a seat on the Emirates, on the Ethiopian Airlines flight to Dubai, you can easily go to Sharjah instead, especially if you live closer to Sharjah Airport. And to be honest with you, I monitor the Ethiopian Dubai flights quite regularly in my spare time at office. And closer to the date of departure, at least I would say 1 week before departure, they start filling out a lot. 2 to 3 weeks before departure, you can get the medium and lower level RBDs, but 1 week before departure, only the top 4 or top 5 RBDs are available in economy class. And it's a low risk venture for ET. It's a 737 MAX 8. So they're not using a wide body on it. So no issues. The cargo will still go to Dubai because the triple daily wide body service. Sharjah will best be catering to the Africans who live in Sharjah and closer to Sharjah Airport. That's it. Nothing.
Perfect. Yeah.
It's
major.
an
I think
O&D
we covered.
route. Yeah.
Yeah, and we covered the demand and we covered the spread of the UAE and the relative density of it as well, and the short distances. And like you say, sometimes it's better for these guys to land in Sharjah. They're closer to their destination than going to DXB anyway.
I won't be surprised if by IATA winter season, Sharjah goes up to daily flights.
And as Sean said, they've got the ability to switch the capacity anyway, depending on the demand. So we'll see. Yeah, we'll see. Yeah. All right, fantastic. So the one that you did want to talk about in depth is, of course, Lagos. So Lagos is now going to be increased from daily to double daily from July this year. So it's it's something that we've looked at before, but that's a big jump, 7 to 14 weekly. So talk to us about this. Does the demand justify this? Is it too much capacity too soon, or are you happy with that it's going to work?
To be honest with you, it isn't too much capacity at all. Actually, it is capacity that is desperately needed by Ethiopian Airlines to be added into the Lagos market for many years. I remember when I was at ARIC in 2014, they had applied for additional flights and it was rejected by the NCA since that time, so 11 years ago. The good thing about the Ethiopian Airlines increase is that it's not at a standard upwave time bank. It's basically spread. The increase of 7 weekly flights is spread across 2 different upwave banks. So it allows them to connect to more cities within their network in both directions. For example, previously Cape Town was never connected to Lagos in both directions, but now with this split schedule, it is allowing Cape Town to be connected in both directions, which is a big market for Ethiopian, considering Lagos, Cape Town is 32,000 passengers approximately, and the only way to get there conveniently is on South African Airways via Joburg. Yeah. Now, with regards to Ethiopian's passenger market profile out of Lagos, there are a few interesting things I would like to point out. Year over year, they basically uplifted the same number of passengers. In 2023, it was 420,000 round trip, whereas in 2024, it just reduced by 1,000 to 419. However, what is interesting is that these numbers include their codeshare flights with AirSky via Lome to Newark and Washington, D.C. Because majority of their Newark and Washington, D.C. passengers from Lagos fly via Lome. Very few of them, only in high season, when the fare is much higher via Lome, they go via Addis Ababa instead. But for example, let me tell you how big the volume is. Last year, on Washington and Newark combined, Ethiopian carried 43,000 passengers to and from Lagos. No small feat whatsoever. And obviously, they first go on AirSky to Lome and then onwards. Now, what is also very interesting to note with regards to Ethiopian's Lagos performance is that the top O&D for 2023 is London Heathrow, despite the huge backtrack via Addis Ababa, flying 5 hours east, connecting there for 3 hours and going up. That is because Lagos, London, due to the bilateral restrictions, there's more demand than supply in 2023 with only Virgin and BA flying non-stop. However, this fell by 54% in 2024 from 29,000 to 14,000 passengers. And that's mainly because Air Peace entered the market and they took away a lot of the one-stop market share away from the other airlines like Ethiopian, Royal Air Maroc, Emirates, Qatar Airways, etc., which also saw a huge drop. Those airlines which I just mentioned, they also saw a big drop in their UK passenger numbers from Lagos in 2024. So that's one thing. But there were many other routes which saw a drop year over year. Another one which dropped by 60% is Manchester. That dropped from 24,000 to about 10,000. Delhi increased. Delhi is actually now the biggest market for Ethiopian Airlines from Lagos, surprisingly. People would think Bombay would have more demand than Delhi for Ethiopian, but Delhi outpaced Mumbai. And one thing which I would like to say is that with their second daily Bombay and Delhi flight leaving in the late afternoon, I wouldn't be surprised if these additional Ethiopian Airlines flights, majority of those passengers end up going to Bombay and Delhi and South Africa, more so than, but I would say majority, I think, will end up going to Bombay and Delhi. Another thing is, apart from that, the point-to-point market is very small. Ethiopian Lagos to Addis Ababa was only 21,000 passengers point-to-point last year, and that represented only 5% of the total number of passengers that Ethiopian carried on the Lagos route. 95% of Ethiopian's passengers on Lagos last year were transit, which goes to show how effective and powerful their Addis Ababa hub is. That these Lagos passengers...
Just out of interest, how does that
Yes.
compare to like Ethiopian overall? If you looked at the entire network, is it... I don't know whether, if you were to have a guess, but you would assume it's still going to be a huge proportion is going to be transit, right?
The only statistic I know is
80% plus.
Probably 80, and this is 95, so it's above the average.
So the only statistic I know for an African carrier is that AirSky's market, 14% is point-to-point and 86% is transit via Lome.
Wow. That's the model.
For sure.
And Lome is a lot smaller market for O&D than Addis.
Yes.
Addis is a major international center in its own right.
But there's also much more volume through Addis. So if you've, in terms of real numbers, Lome versus Addis, even if the percentages are similar. But yes, that's fascinating. And also the things you said about Lagos, Cape Town as well, because that's a big unserved market. But now with the additional capacity and the connections, that is going to provide some much needed connectivity there, I think.
Yes, and a few other points just to point out. There were some markets which grew in stature in terms of market share that Ethiopian grabbed year over year. Number one, the one which had the biggest jump year over year on the Lagos route was Milan. Passengers on Ethiopian increased big time year over year from 13,000 to about 24,000, followed by Guangzhou, which grew by 42%, then Bombay 40%, and then Rome 30%. So quite a big number on Italy. And that will help the new Rome flight also, which is in the evening from Addis Ababa. That feed from Lagos will also be incremental. And another good thing is that these extra flights, Ethiopian has taken a low-risk approach. They're starting off with the MAX 8, not with the wide body. Some people messaged me privately on WhatsApp saying in high season, Ethiopian will suffer baggage issues on these flights. And I was like, not really, because since they will be flying twice a day, if there any baggage left behind, they'll just send it on the wide body flight, either the same day or the next day, depending when the passenger's flight is. The only problem is if that passenger is
connecting,
going outside of Lagos to some other city in Nigeria, then it might be a problem getting the bags there. But I don't think it'll be a big problem altogether. And as I wouldn't be surprised also if one of these additional flights get upgraded to 787-8 within a year, because Ethiopian will be very aggressive in pricing to promote these new flights, which they've already have been. I believe Sean posted something on airliners a few days ago because someone noticed that these new flights are cheaper than the original flights, which is natural. That's basic revenue management to stimulate demand and to spread out the demand also.
Great.
So yeah, overall, it's definitely going to work well for them. And you will definitely see market share of Qatar, Emirates, and Kenya Airways in particular dropping to Africa and Asia and Middle East with these additional flights launched.
Okay, I think you've summarized a lot of the good points, but I'm just going to add a few things over here. Number one is going to be on the choice of aircraft. And certainly, as you've said, it's a MAX for now, but I think there's two things we need to look at. Number one is that these are third bank flights, and that's when we look in terms of the scheduling. And quite simply, they only have MAXs available on the third bank as it stands right now. So feeding to and from the third bank is primarily MAXs. And in fact, these are the MAXs that are going to be freed up by switching the Dhaka flights to 787s. Dhaka in Bangladesh is currently being run on a MAX. That is becoming 787s, and those 787s are extending onto Hanoi, which we covered a couple of months ago. Those MAXs are the ones that are freed up and that are going to be taking on this daily additional Lagos service of the third bank. But as we've discussed on these connecting markets, I think it's very interesting to see the scheduling on the third bank because, as Behramjee pointed out, but I'll list over here, the 5 largest connecting markets for Ethiopian, excluding the ASky code shares through Lome, are Delhi, Gwangju, Milan, Mumbai, and Addis Ababa itself. So those are the 5 largest markets that ET is serving. And every single one of them is being fed to or from these new flights. So it becomes very important for them to, as Behramjee said, to move the traffic away from the main bank onto the secondary flights, because that then opens up the capacity on the main bank into other routes which are potentially currently spilling. ET has put an A350-1000 onto the Lagos route daily now. That is the largest possible capacity they can put in on the main bank. So it's obvious that they are spilling demand. By moving passengers who are going to Gwangju, to Delhi, to Mumbai, and so forth onto the third bank flights, onto the new flights, that will... It's not a zero-sum game. At the end of the day, that will actually help ET overall with the network effect, simply because that gives them the ability to sell one of those 400-plus seats on the A350 daytime flight to passengers who are connecting to the Bangkoks or to the Manilas or to Singapore and everywhere else, the entire Europe, the entire network effect that ET has off the main bank, which is reduced on the third bank. But looking at which markets ET has seen growth in, which he pointed out, and are now the largest markets, it makes absolute sense that they've chosen to put this on a third bank flight simply because of the connectivity that the third bank brings. They're really not sacrificing much at all. All their top 5 markets are served through this third bank. Yeah, I see it a no-brainer. The one thing, though, which we should just point out, and I don't think it's relevant to this because it came as a bit of a surprise even after that, but ET currently, because of the closure of Enugu Airport in Nigeria for runway repairs for the next month, he's had to cut their Enugu flights for the next month. So while this won't actually help in that respect, the capacity is actually going to be pretty flat until the Enugu flights come back, because you're effectively adding a daily Lagos but taking away an Enugu. And certainly while the Enugu is not daily at this point, we're just talking a few hundred seats a week, as opposed to a doubling of flights is not necessarily a doubling of capacity in this case. So just putting a bit of perspective on it. But I expect to see it not increase in frequencies. I think that the frequencies will stay at 14, similar to what we've seen in Accra, because this is exactly what they've done in Accra. What they tried to do in Abidjan and failed, but it'll stay at 14, but we might see larger aircraft as the third bank grows a bit more. But ET is tight on wide bodies. They do not have spare wide bodies, and they don't have spare wide bodies of the third bank to dedicate to this. The third bank wide bodies are doing Johannesburg and India.
Okay. Yeah, I think the most exciting thing is that we're all very positive about this route, and obviously there's plenty of demand there, and T continue to grow and continue to connect. And yeah, I always hear about you guys talking about first bank, second bank, third bank. Like in my head, I'm visualizing that. I'm sure you see it very differently to how I do it in my own head. Let's move on. Something that we've discussed before, a market we've discussed before, but there's obviously conversation now, which is Perth to Johannesburg. We've talked about how big a market this is. Of course, it's served by SAA at the moment, and Qantas is saying they're looking at Perth to Joburg. Now, what I've got here is they're looking from December, starting 3 times a week. Is that what you guys are hearing? And what do we think? We've always said this is a great route for them. Obviously, Qantas fly to Joburg from Sydney, and they've upped the capacity on the 380, right? So to a 380. So the Perth route, it's a bit of a no-brainer. Do we feel that? And starting in December is summer season.
Okay. There's a lot here that I actually got a lot of info on this morning. I was chatting with, again, a shout out to Evan at Analytic Flying on this. He runs an Australian information site on this, and I was chatting with him about this morning. So big shout out to him for some of this info.
Hey, Evan. Thanks, mate.
Yeah. And anyway, the basic thing is that, yes, these flights are currently in the schedule. They've been filed with OAG for December, but they're not yet open for sale. And the reason they're pushing these flights it's the reason that there's a holdup in putting them for sale, and the reason they put the flights in the first place are actually more or less the same, is that Qantas has signed a new agreement with Perth Airport last year, which has included effectively bringing Qantas's entire operation, domestic and international, into a single terminal rather than currently Perth is split as an international terminal for all airlines and a domestic terminal for all airlines. It is going to change now, where it's going to become a Qantas terminal and then an everybody else terminal kind of thing. And consequently, part of that means that Qantas is guaranteeing Perth Airport certain traffic numbers, which means they obviously have to increase a lot of their flying and international flying from Perth in particular. But the problem they're currently having is that the facility where they are relocating to is currently supposedly lacking appropriate agricultural inspection facilities needed for Johannesburg flights. So they are still waiting on the federal government to sign off on those before they can put the flights on sale. Because as far as they are concerned, putting those flights from Terminal 1 would just simply mess up their entire single terminal strategy and so forth. So that is what is currently the holdup. Now, the interesting part on this is actually going to be operated by one of Qantas's New Zealand-based aircraft. Simultaneous with their launch of this Perth to Johannesburg flight, they are launching Auckland to Perth flights. Again, this is all going to be run with Airbus 330s. And if you look at the schedules, the proposed schedules for these flights, the aircraft's actually going to be based in Auckland, originate in Auckland at 8:30 a.m., come into Perth at 11:30, depart from Perth at 1:30 p.m., get to Joburg at 6:45 p.m. And then the return leaves Joburg at 9:30 p.m., gets to Perth at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, leaves Perth in the evening, and then arrives in Auckland at 4:45 a.m. 2 days later, thanks to all the time zones. So this is actually going to be crewed out of New Zealand with a New Zealand-based aircraft from their Auckland base. And certainly the Perth to Joburg is probably going to be crewed by Australian crew out of Perth, but the aircraft and the origination of it comes from there. And again, part of Qantas's agreement with Perth Airport is that they will be able to facilitate airside transit for international connecting passengers. This is why it's so important to have everything from the same terminal for that, because this aircraft will basically come in and passengers in transit to New Zealand, which, as we flagged at the end of last year, it is increasingly becoming a market that more and more, while the volumes are still small, it's a market that more and more people are using as justification for their entry into the South South Africa to Oceania markets there. So I know that Cathay and Singapore have certainly cited New Zealand as a reason why they're increasing services to South Africa. And this one is really obvious. It is a New Zealand-based aircraft with direct airside connections at Perth onward to that. And remember, Perth is the logical hub. The volumes from Perth to forget sub-Saharan Africa, to Southern and Eastern Africa in particular, are equivalent to the volumes from Sydney or Melbourne. While Perth is a much smaller city relative to those, there are a hell of a lot of Africans in Perth. It is called Perth Fontaine by the South Africans simply because every second person there speaks Afrikaans. And when you're looking at that, and you're looking at Adelaide, when you're looking at other markets to the west of the traditional hubs of Sydney and Melbourne, Perth is a more logical connecting point. And as Qantas is doubling down on Perth because of the commitment to the to traffic numbers at the airport and so forth, this is just another step in Qantas's larger picture. And I think it's fairly solid. The one thing to note, though, is because of the schedule, and the schedule is pretty much being dictated by the New Zealand side of the route, because while you can fly from Perth at different times of day, to be able to fly from Auckland via Perth, and again, vice versa, to be able to get in at the hours while the airports are still functioning, they're stuck having to arrive into Johannesburg at 6:45 p.m., which basically means little to none onward connections within the region. They will have some feed theoretically to British Airways and their One World partner to be able to route people from Auckland, Perth, Johannesburg, London, theoretically, but highly doubt that is a driver of this route. The route is going to be targeting O&D traffic in the Gauteng and potentially at most KZN Durban area, because that is pretty much all that's going to connect with a 6:45 arrival into Johannesburg. Yeah. That's the backstory behind what's happening with Qantas's potential Perth-Johannesburg. And again, thanks to Evan at Analytic Flying for the heads up on this.
Yeah, thanks, Evan. That's fascinating to hear that. I didn't know that about the strategy. And whether you've got something to add on this, Behramjee, but also the impact on SAA, I suppose, and whether this market can just cope with the extra capacity. So give us some numbers and some analysis. Yes,
sure. Firstly, Sean forgot to mention one thing which I had clarified with him last week. As many of our viewers would probably think, just like in USA, Australia would first require you to, if you're an international passenger in transit, you would have to clear immigration and customs and recheck in your bags. But for Perth Airport now, with this new facility, that is no longer the case. Hence, it makes transiting from country A via Australia to country B much more smoother and more convenient. So that is going to be a big draw for the Qantas passengers who would be flying a same plane service from Auckland to via Perth to Johannesburg, number one. Number two, this also has resulted in Qantas reducing their flagship Sydney-Johannesburg route, which was flown daily last summer. Next summer, it's going to be reduced to 4 times a week on an A380 instead of a daily flight, or was it 6 weekly? But the good thing is...
It was a daily before it went to 380, and now then it went down to 6.
Okay. But that increase in frequency resulted in the Sydney-Johannesburg market being stimulated quite a bit. It grew from 55,000 to 63,000 year over year, whereas the Perth market has now become number 2 for Johannesburg from Australia. It's now down. It's gone to 43,000, but it grew from 39,000 in 2023. So a 10% increase over there. The total Australia to Johannesburg market last year was 174,000 passengers. The Cape Town was much, much less, but Cape Town was number 2. But the good thing is, with Perth and Sydney being added, it's an aggressive move also by Qantas to retaliate against South African Airways, because at the end of the day, Qantas will be targeting the Australia domestic as well as New Zealand passenger, whereas South African Airways will be targeting more the Southern Africa and South Africa domestic passenger on their flight. And two hidden gold mines for Qantas on this route is that Brisbane demand for Johannesburg has increased quite a bit. It was 32,000 passengers last year. It even beat Melbourne, which came in at 26,000 only. So Qantas has a few volume market segments to tap into on this flight, and they can connect either via Sydney or via Perth. So that flexibility is there in terms of the schedule, plus the Qantas frequent flyer program for Australia point of sale is very powerful. And I'm sure they would get majority of the high-yielding business class passenger, corporate passenger versus South African Airways. Because South African Airways' main weakness on this Perth route is the onboard product quality of their J-class cabin. So I would say overall Qantas benefits much more, and South African Airways will feel the heat once this Perth-Johannesburg route starts.
Great.
But overall, a very good move by Qantas, no doubt.
Yeah, I think when the SAA route was announced, we were all waiting for that anyway. It was a lot about aircraft availability and networking and all this other stuff. But now that Sean's explained what he's explained, I think it does make sense. So now we'll move to one that's a little more contentious. I'm expecting some interesting opinions on this, which is Etihad, our favourites, increasing Nairobi to twice daily from 15th of December 2025, quoting them, increased demands and positive early results on this route. Is that what you're seeing? Is that what is, I see head in hands from Sean. So while he recovers himself, Behramjee, do you want to start us on this one?
With regards to Etihad increasing Nairobi, it is nothing more than Peter Pan type of network planning, literally speaking. It makes absolute no sense whatsoever, considering their history in Africa and their reputation in Africa. Increasing from 4 times a week, which is the current schedule, to eventually daily, which is okay, but then increasing immediately to double daily is suicidal. And they'll end up learning the hard way. We all know that what will happen once this double daily operation starts, how the results will be. Because the second daily flight will be departing Abu Dhabi at 2 o'clock in the morning. They're slowly starting to build that hub wave bank. You all must have seen some updates regarding some new European flights being operated by the 321 LR, which would connect to these new 2 o'clock in the morning flights to the Far East and now Nairobi. But very few passengers from Europe will be flying via Abu Dhabi to Nairobi. That 2 o'clock hub wave bank departure time is mainly for Indian passengers, few Far East cities connect, and GCC. But at the end of the day, there is hardly any point-to-point demand from Nairobi to Abu Dhabi. This increase makes absolutely no sense. It is purely a joke. Whoever has commented on it to me or online in various forums, they know this is nothing more than La Land planning, and it will be a massive failure.
Yeah.
And
we're
it's
obviously,
very sad
you're
that
coming
they're
at
doing
this.
this, just dumping capacity just for the sake of having connections and all. It's totally clueless. Totally.
Go on, Sean.
Planes will fly. They have promised a large number of flights to all over the world by the end of this year. Isn't it 40 routes, new routes, or something like that? They've got to keep adding. They're taking delivery of planes. They got to fly them somewhere. And double daily Nairobi makes probably more sense than El Main, which is, I promise you, that's going to be my vote for best new route of the year, simply for its obscurity. But yeah, that's what it is. I have given up trying to attribute commercial reasoning to a lot of what Etihad is doing right now. One can only hope that they are doing this with a clear knowledge of history, because this is not the first time they've done it, and it backfired spectacularly for them the last time they attempted this. But their money, who am I to question other than the chief regional troublemaker?
And also,
so let's wait and see. Go on,
there's one thing I'd like to add. Apart from Nairobi, the other thing which is absolutely silly on their part is increasing, though it's not Africa, but it's increasing Karachi to 4 times a day from the winter season onwards. That is beyond ridiculous. Beyond. And they will, wow. Sean and I know, closer to the launch date of these additional flights, either they will reduce capacity or reduce flights or just cancel the incremental flights altogether because of the very low advance loads. There's no way they can sustain double daily Nairobi nor 4 daily Karachi flights. No way.
Yeah, let's wait and see, and we can play this clip back in December, and we'll work out exactly how many of these flights are happening by that point. Go on, Sean. I think you want to say something, do you?
Yeah, he is.
I am not going to I still owe $20 over AirAsia to Nairobi, so I am not going to put any money up in terms of people launching ridiculous Nairobi routes. I put my money where my mouth was
How
once
is that
before, and I'm
flight doing?
$20 down. So
How is that
it's still
flight doing?
flying. I know someone is actually flying on it next week, and we'll find out how full it was once they've traveled. But yeah, it's still on sale, and there's some very attractive fares. So look, AirAsia is obviously in this for the long term. We know that strategically they've got other goals for Africa beyond just an OND to Nairobi. Let's see. I think they're playing a long game in that situation, and obviously Etihad is also playing a long game. The question, though, is AirAsia has a better track record than Etihad of knowing when to hold them and knowing when to fold them.
Oh, nice quote. Yeah, absolutely. And we'll have the AirAsia team with us in AviaDev in Zanzibar as well, which is great. We won't have the Etihad team, I don't think, though. But now let's move on to one of our deep dive sections that I know our listeners do enjoy. So we're going to look at the London to Africa market. You've already touched on this a little bit, Behramjee, with obviously the Lagos conversation. And a big thing we've talked about in the last couple of editions, definitely in the last year, has been the growth from Gatwick. But what we're going to do is look at that kind of market overall, how it's adapting and developing. I don't know who's going to kick us off here.
I'm going to kick this off. I've got a full page of notes. I've got a full page of notes here. So keep
your powder dry on the next topic. You've got to keep that one.
Yeah, it will be mentioned, but it won't be going into the detail. But yeah, this is something that I've been looking at all year, and then specifically in the last month or so, I've had a chance to look deeper into the UK to Africa market. And full disclosure, I'm doing this in the day job on behalf of clients as well, not just for my amusement and for the information of our listeners / viewers. But yeah, here's the interesting thing. Between 2023 and 2024, London Heathrow to sub-Saharan Africa traffic dropped by 11.3%. So it went from 3.1 million in 2023 down to 2.7 million in 2024. While at the same time, London Gatwick traffic to sub-Saharan Africa jumped by 54.6%, and that's up from 0.8 million to 1.38 million. And that is a significant shift in capacity from Heathrow to Gatwick. And it's not just capacity, but shift in, because this is not just driven by capacity shifts, it's driven by O&D traffic shifts. So, this is a person who might be flying from London Heathrow via Dubai to Harare is instead now flying from London Gatwick via Dubai to Harare. And generally, I've always been of this impression, and it's a theory I've expounded for 20 plus years. When you are looking at serving the London market, so your O&D traffic is the London catchment area, you're focusing on people who live in London, who are going to London, it really makes no difference whether you're flying to Heathrow or Gatwick. When you're looking at corporate accounts, when you're looking at connections, that is when Heathrow becomes disproportionately more important than Gatwick. And because so much of the traffic between the UK and sub-Saharan Africa in particular is VFR traffic. So this is the traffic for whom the destination is fixed, is just the way to get there that is largely in flux. To them, using Heathrow or Gatwick really doesn't make that much of a difference. And consequently, we've seen that Heathrow's share now of UK traffic to Africa is down to 66% of total 66% of London to sub-Saharan African traffic now is going through Heathrow, which is down from over 80% a couple of years ago. So that is, Heathrow's dominance is definitely being eroded. Gatwick is still barely half of Heathrow's numbers. They're not quite there yet, but the growth at Gatwick, which we're going to see more of this year, because while last year's Gatwick growth was driven by Air Mauritius shifting its flights, by British Airways introducing Gatwick to Accra, by Ethiopian introducing their Gatwick flights for the full year. This year, we're going to see similar. We're seeing Uganda Airlines coming into Gatwick, which we've covered extensively. We're seeing Kenya Airways starting Gatwick. We're seeing even little Air Sierra Leone starting Gatwick this weekend, actually, but we'll cover that in our next topic. And, it's quite a major market distribution. So again, I've done a little further look into some of these numbers. British Airways is still actually the leader from London into sub-Saharan Africa. And a lot of this is being driven by their dominance in the South African market, Johannesburg and Cape Town in particular. British Airways has 31% of the total London to sub-Saharan Africa market. But Ethiopian Airlines is catching up very fast. They've shown 29% growth year on year, again, driven by the increase in Manchester flights, given by the increase of their Gatwick flights. But ET is really up there. Rwanda was actually the largest growth percentage last year. They grew by 40% year on year between 23 and 24. And those were driven primarily by connecting traffic mainly to Johannesburg, but also to Entebbe. Now, I do not see that continuing. I see their Entebbe traffic really dropping significantly once Uganda Airline enters the market. And I think they will struggle to be competitive on the Johannesburg route as well, given that Uganda Airlines and Kenya Airways as well are adding more capacity into the UK market. And that is going to be something that Rwanda Air will struggle to maintain that position. Ethiopian's 29% year-on-year growth has been driven primarily by one route, and that route surprisingly, well, maybe not surprisingly, especially for those who looked at Gert from Airbus's presentation last year, and I was chatting to Gert about this actually when I saw these numbers, but Harare from both Heathrow and Gatwick has grown from 39,000 passengers to 75,000 passengers between 2023 and 2024 only on Ethiopian Airlines. So Ethiopian Airlines is moving about 100 passengers a day each way between Heathrow and Gatwick down to Harare. Emirates has held strong, but what we've actually seen is that basically this is where things are in there. Manchester to sub-Saharan Africa has grown by 15%, give or take, in 2024 as well. And that has been with a lack of direct service into sub-Saharan Africa itself. The growth has actually been through Ethiopian and through the Gulf carriers. And I think this has very clearly made it establish Manchester as the UK's third Africa gateway. Heathrow number one, Gatwick a strong but distant number two, and Manchester, again, a strong but distant number three over there. The Birminghams, Edinburghs, Newcastles, those are completely irrelevant players. So which markets in sub-Saharan Africa have grown from the UK? I'd say that the winners have actually been Cape Town, Nairobi, Harare, Kigali, Mauritius, and Zanzibar. So for the most part, these are largely leisure and tourism-driven markets, which is therefore outbound tourism from the UK to Africa. And this is something we've seen all over Africa in a post-COVID world, is that Africa has emerged or re-emerged as an attractive destination for the US, for Europe, and so forth. But it's clear that a lot of the growth in the UK has been driven from there. Struggling has been Nigeria. The two of the biggest losers are Lagos and Abuja. Lagos down 8%, Abuja down 10%. And this is despite the increase of non-stop flights in the market with Air Peace. Overall, the Nigeria to UK market has been hurting due to poor economic performance in Nigeria, as well as visa issues on both Nigerian and the UK side. And consequently, Virgin Atlantic actually saw their UK to Africa traffic fall by 16%. 13% of that is due to the London-Lagos, but they also saw erosion of the Virgin Atlantic market share to both Johannesburg and Cape Town. As I say, it's been a very fascinating deep dive into the numbers and trying to make sense of what the numbers are implying. But I think the clear conclusions you draw from this is that Gatwick is holding its own because it is equivalent to Heathrow as far as serving London O&D traffic, especially for VFR and leisure markets. VFR and leisure markets are driving the growth in UK to sub-Saharan traffic, and Ethiopian in particular, and again, this is no surprise given how much we tend to be Ethiopian fanboys here, but Ethiopian in particular is really seizing on this Sixth Freedom traffic via Addis Ababa by adding such huge capacity into Gatwick, adding additional capacity into Manchester, which is even growing further this summer, and putting the A350-1000 into Heathrow, which is just more capacity there as well. So yeah, that's a general summary of the UK and London in particular to Africa and sub-Saharan Africa in particular analysis.
Wow, that was a lot of information. I think the really great thing that I'm pulling out of this is that a lot of this growth, yes, you've got the odd bit from British Airways, but a lot of it is African carriers driving this as well. So you've had North Atlantic, of course, come in, you've got Virgin, you've got BA, but realistically, it's the Kenya Airways coming into Gatwick, it's the Uganda Airlines, it's Air Peace doing what they're doing. So it's great to see that, obviously, as a Brit. Anything that you need to add, Behramjee? I'm sure you've got your own stuff here, but Sean may have stolen some of your thunder there.
Sean talked a lot more about the Gatwick effect, which is what we had discussed previously, what he will focus on and what I would focus on. So, with regards to my analysis on the London to Africa market, let's start with all three London airports combined. Year over year, the total London
Sorry,
to
what do you
Africa
consider the
market,
third airport for London?
Yeah,
Are you
what's the
considering
third one?
Luton or Stansted?
Stansted.
Not City. Oh, right, Stansted.
Okay, why not
No.
Luton? And why not City?
Why not
Luton
Southend?
doesn't have a wide body service, nor does City.
Just because they don't have wide body service, City in particular pushes a lot of traffic. City's actually in third. City's got more traffic than Stansted to Africa running over European hubs. But again, we're talking in the 1% to 3%. So, the small,
It's
irrelevant
really the big
numbers.
two,
But
isn't
City is
it?
more important than Stansted. Yeah. Heathrow and Gatwick are 90% plus of the market. City and Stansted are like 1% to 3% each, and then Luton and the rest make up the.
Okay, that's good for me to know. Thank you. But anyways, regarding the total London market to Africa from the three airports I mentioned grew by about 10% year over year. In 2023, this includes the North Africa part, because there's a lot of demand to Morocco in particular and Egypt. So anyway, so in 2023, demand was 6.08 million, and that grew to 6.6 million in 2024. So just about 10% increase. What I found interesting was I looked at the comparison of how Ethiopian Airlines fared in London versus Kenya Airways, because I feel that is very important for our viewers to understand. Kenya Airways, according to the data that I have, their total passenger numbers on the London route dropped by 25% year over year. It dropped from 220,000 to 165,000 year over year. And half of this 165,000 was point-to-point traffic to Nairobi. So 82,000 passengers were over point-to-point. On the point-to-point Nairobi to London route, British Airways had slightly higher market share than Kenya Airways. Naturally, because BA uses a much bigger aircraft, Kenya Airways is restricted to a 240-seater airplane, whereas BA uses a 350-1000. BA has 33% market share of the point-to-point, and Kenya Airways has 30% point-to-point market share, and the rest are carried by one-stop operators. Now, in comparison, as I mentioned, Kenya Airways London market dropped by 25%. Ethiopian's London market grew by 38%. It grew from 370,000 passengers to 509,000 passengers year over year. And just to let you all know, this 509,000 includes London, Heathrow, and Gatwick. Now, if I compare apples to apples, and if I take out the Gatwick number, and if
You
I
can't just take out Gatwick. ET is marketing Gatwick as a secondary option to
comparing it
Heathrow.
to
I mean,
Kenya
Heathrow Gatwick
Airways,
flights are flying.
Yeah,
but you can't really say that leave out Gatwick, because Gatwick connects both ways to Nairobi, for example. It connects to
I know
Mombasa.
that,
It connects better to much of Kenya than Kenya Airways themselves do.
Okay. But now, if we were just looking at Heathrow versus Heathrow on ET versus KQ, ET still wins because they use a much bigger aircraft. Out of Heathrow, can Ethiopian carry 356,000 passengers versus what I said about Kenya Airways carrying 165,000 passengers. Now, as Sean correctly mentioned, and I knew Jon would not know this, he would be very surprised that Harare was Ethiopian's biggest market out of the London route last year. But there are some other nice surprises as well, which I will just go into. Firstly, with regards to the point-to-point market on the Heathrow route in particular, Heathrow to Addis Ababa constituted only 9% of the point-to-point of their total passenger portfolio. So 91% were transiting via Addis to anywhere else in Africa, as well as some places in the Middle East and Indian subcontinent. Yes, for those of you who are surprised, there are quite a number of passengers who take Ethiopian Airlines from London via Addis to India and Pakistan. So at times, especially during high season, when their fares are competitive and they have capacity available, unlike the Gulf carriers. So as far as their top markets are concerned on the Heathrow route, number one is Harare. Number 2 is Cape Town. Cape Town saw a big growth year over year. It grew by 76% by Ethiopian Airlines, though their fares fell down, but the passenger volume grew by 76%. Mombasa, demand for Mombasa and Ethiopian Airlines grew by 40% year over year. Johannesburg grew by 59% year over year, and Victoria Falls grew by 41% each respectively. Sean, I don't know this airport's code. Hotel Golf Alpha. Is it somewhere in Somalia? Hargeisa or something?
Hargeisa, Somalia. Hargeisa.
Okay. Yeah, so that one has also been a big star for Ethiopian. 25,000 passengers last year, all from Heathrow. Whereas if you look at it in comparison, let me just pull up Kenya Airways' top markets on their Heathrow route. 1 second. There are too many data cells going on. But before that loads, let me tell you in total, Sean didn't mention this, the top sub-Saharan markets from London year over year. Lagos naturally is number 1. Like Sean correctly mentioned, it's dropped to 579,000 passengers. Number 2 was Johannesburg, 426,000. Cape Town, 365. Nairobi, 273. But what was surprising to me is Mauritius. Mauritius actually is more than Nairobi now. Mauritius is 312,000 passengers from London, from Heathrow and Gatwick and Stansted put together. Then comes Accra, 260,000. Accra saw a big jump for Gatwick in particular. Then Abuja at 144. And then Harare also saw a big jump in traffic to and from London. And that's mainly not because of Zimbabweans moving there, it's because of British tourism, British safari tourism exploring Zimbabwe. That grew to 131,000 passengers. And a lot of that traffic went to Gatwick, not Heathrow, mind you. Then we have Zanzibar and Mombasa. Those two destinations also increased from London. Zanzibar came in at 63,000, which is more than Dar es Salaam, mind you. And Mombasa came in at 44,000. Now, with regards to Kenya Airways' performance on the London route, apart from the point-to-point which I mentioned, here we go. Kenya Airways, their second biggest market, apart from Nairobi, was naturally Mombasa. Though, again, year over year, it fell in demand for them. It fell by 20%. From 23,000 in 2023, it fell to about 19,000. And their third biggest feeder on London was Zanzibar, followed by Johannesburg, and then Entebbe. Though the Entebbe volume year over year dropped by 45%. Even the fare dropped for Kenya Airways. But the good thing for Kenya Airways is their point-to-point yield increased just by a little bit, just by 3%, which means they're getting a little bit more higher fare paying economy class and a bit more business class passengers. But overall, I think naturally Ethiopian Airlines is the major star in London for sub-Saharan Africa. And now with Lagos connecting with their Gatwick flights, I don't think so. I'll be seeing a lot of 3-piece promo notices on LinkedIn for their Gatwick flights once Lagos is fully matured with the connection on offer.
Yeah.
So yeah, Sean covered a lot of it also, but yes, Ethiopian is increasing Gatwick to a daily flight this year. Am I correct?
On and off again, but as of right now, it's at 4 weekly. I know this because unfortunately I have to fly into Heathrow tomorrow because there's no flight to Gatwick on my trip up for the Air Sierra Leone inaugural. Which of course is just a position where we can. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, you're stealing my fun.
Yes, so I'm flying in on Heathrow and I have to fly out. I prefer to fly out from Gatwick, but I have to fly into Heathrow because there's no Gatwick flight on a Friday night.
Yeah. So yeah, let's cover that before we move on with the last couple of topics. So Air Sierra Leone launching from Freetown to Gatwick 3 times a week from the 16th of June using a leased 737 MAX. But Sean is going to be here this weekend and he's going to tell you all about it.
Yeah, as I've mentioned before, Air Sierra Leone's a project that I've been working with the people behind it for over a year now, on working on the business case and putting together the various nuts and bolts behind it. But now it is going to become a reality. The first plane is going to depart from London Gatwick. Well, the first plane is going to come out with the decals and the it's not a full livery because it's actually an all-white plane, which is going to have decals on it, but that's going to be revealed to the world on Friday evening at Gatwick, and then Saturday morning is going to be the first flight from Gatwick down to Sierra Leone, and then returning on Sunday from Sierra Leone to Gatwick with all sorts of VIPs and fanfare on that. So that's going to be a one-off flight now for Sierra Leone National Day, which is this weekend, and then regular flights 3 times a week between Gatwick and Sierra Leone are going to begin from the middle of June. So June 16th, I believe, is the date for that. So 3 times a week, Gatwick, Sierra Leone. It's a decent sized market, 40,000 passengers, give or take. No non-stop players in that market right now. I expect to see 60 to 65% market share for Air Sierra Leone by Christmas. I think it's a bit late now for capture a huge part of the summer traffic. It's got a good team in the UK. Shout out to the guys at ASL because I know they're going to be listening to this. And shout out to their newly appointed UK GSA, sponsored AviaDev, which is airline pros and good friends of ours. So shout out to Lindsay and Shrey and all the team over there as well for the good job landing the GSA with Air Sierra Leone. So I'm excited to see it. It'll be a quick trip to the UK to see it, but it's always great when you see something that begins on paper come to reality. And yeah, the aircraft's going to be a 737 MAX. That's going to be an interesting. James Pearson, another friend of the show, pointed out in Simple Flying that this is actually going to be the longest 737 MAX route from London. It's going to be blocked around 7 hours, and I think it's the 3rd longest from the UK to anywhere. So it's going to be a long ride on the MAX, but I think the MAX delivers the economics. I know the MAX delivers the economics, considering I did the business plan. But I know the MAX delivers the best economics relative to having a wide body, especially when the market is so seasonal. Yeah, that's this weekend's highlight.
Best of
Sean,
luck with that. Yes, Behramjee.
If every passenger has 2 pieces baggage with them, how many passengers would this MAX be able to carry on the route, approximately?
It is going to be payload restricted, but it's going to be payload restricted by season. So it's largely going to depend upon what temperatures are at departure time from Sierra Leone. But we're looking at probably in the range of about 260 to 280 bags. So that's a ballpark estimate.
So 140 passengers.
2 bags a passenger, do the mathematics. Yeah, 130, 140 would probably be what it is. But again, these numbers are not inked. They're dependent upon temperatures and winds and everything else. Because just 100 kilo shift in the fuel requirements you need to carry that's 1 more passenger in bag.
Yes, because a friend of mine at Dhaka airport, he told me that Ethiopians' payload restriction on their MAX 8 out of Dhaka to Addis is 114 passengers if everyone has 2 bags.
And that's a load factor of what, Behramjee, give or take?
So if they have about
65,
56 passengers on their MAX 8 or 160, whatever.
So you're looking at 70%.
Yeah, 71%. And obviously no commercial cargo can be carried.
You're going to bulk out anyway on that. Yeah. If you're opening a route with the goal to run commercial cargo on a 737 MAX, you've got a wrong advisor. Yeah. I know Air Sierra Leone does not have the wrong advisor.
Good luck with that, and safe travels to the UK. Might bump into each other because I'm flying out to Kilimanjaro on Saturday, so we may cross.
If it is delayed, we'll definitely cross at Paddington.
Yeah, that's true. That is true.
You're flying to Kilimanjaro?
No, Kenya Airways. Airways. Yeah, overnight on Saturday night. So that will be great. I always, where I can, use African Airlines wherever I can.
Kilimanjaro shall rise like an empress above the Serengeti.
Above the Serengeti. Indeed it will.
Even though Kilimanjaro is not actually near the Serengeti, but...
It's irrelevant. It's a great song. It's irrelevant. Let's just move on that one. So a couple more things to cover. So our stripy pajama friend Condor are going to boost their South African capacity this winter. So they are going to increase Frankfurt to Cape Town from 5 times a week to daily from November the 1st. And Joburg is going to go up from 2 to 3 weekly on the same date. I have actually flown back from Cape Town to Frankfurt on the aircraft. It was great. I had a premium economy. I quite enjoyed it. A very sort of modernly kitted out aircraft. But yeah, this is pretty simple, isn't it? It's just increased demand to SA. There's so much German traffic going down there for the summer, especially the Southern Hemisphere summer, and it's going to start at the beginning of that season.
Who starts?
I think that's pretty much it. Southern Africa in particular is counter-cyclical to where their bread and butter North American traffic is at. So you've got to put the plane somewhere. And as we discussed last year, Africa has become the destination of choice for a lot of airlines to put their spare northern winter capacity. So I think this is Condor. Condor's got a tricky legal situation with Lufthansa in Frankfurt in terms of Lufthansa has mandated to provide them feed at certain rates and so forth. So they're in a situation where they need to continue justifying their existence by trying to win market share away from the Lufthansa Group airlines, and adding capacity is the only way you can really do that, given Lufthansa is such a behemoth, not just in Germany, but in the Germanic world, whether that's Switzerland, Austria, and so forth.
And it's also encroaching on with these new products like Discover, right? Like a new airline that is going into that leisure market. Now, the Discover aircraft cannot go to South Africa at the moment. We covered that on the podcast when I spoke to the CCO, that obviously if they get larger aircraft when they're phased out from Lufthansa or whatever it may be, then of course they'll look at those markets with that brand as well. But of course, Discover serving Zanzibar, serving Vic Falls, serving Windhoek, etc. as well, and doing all those bits, and starting Seychelles as well later this year. Have you got some numbers for us, Behramjee?
Yes. Firstly, I'm happy to see Condor taking an aggressive move in Africa. It was expected, and it's part of a long list of aggressive, commercially oriented moves that they've done for the upcoming winter 2025 season. Apart from Africa, they're also increasing flights to Dubai with their cooperation with Emirates. But with regards to Southern Africa in particular, they're flying it using a very fuel-efficient A330-900neo. So that's the right aircraft to use on that route for them. Point-to-point demand grew year over year by 27% on Frankfurt to Cape Town. It grew from 128,000 to 163,000. And the fare only dropped by 9% year over year. So not too bad, because the volume compensated for the yield drop. With regards to Frankfurt to Johannesburg, which have increased from 2 to 3 times a week, that market also grew year over year by 11%. It grew from 83,000 to 93,000. In total, when you compare the two top German cities, Frankfurt and Munich, versus to Johannesburg and Cape Town, total market demand grew from 314,000 to 357,000 year over year. So 14% increase. What Condor will do with these increased frequencies is that they will be taking away the one-stop market share, which is with Ethiopian, Turkish Airlines, Air France, KLM, British Airways, etc. They'll be focusing more on providing convenience to German passengers who want to pay a bit extra to fly non-stop. And so the passengers who will be flying, who Air France, KLM, BA, etc., cater to, and even Swiss, they'll see their market shares drop a bit out of Germany with these increased frequencies of Condor. Don't expect a lot of commercial cargo, because it's quite a long flight with the A330neo, and the departure from Johannesburg with their altitude problem will not allow that much cargo to be transported. So yeah, overall, very good move. Has absolutely no risk whatsoever, and it should do well for them. And they've published this many months in advance. I always like to say they publish it many months in advance, because Sean's motherland country, Air India, they like to announce new routes and frequency increases on long-haul routes just 6 weeks in advance. Bombay, Melbourne, and Delhi, Amsterdam.
You're talking about my motherland. Do you want to talk about Pakistan International Airlines and,
Let's not get
their
started.
launch of Paris routes with, what was it, 3 days notice, or was it a bit more than that?
No, not 3 days. I have
And
no
some
idea.
interesting marketing as well, I seem to remember.
Exactly.
Yeah, but
So let's
Indians
not
are
get into discussion of motherlands. We are both adopted Africans now.
Exactly. Or what do you mean both? All of us. All of us. Come on, all of us.
Absolutely. Since I'm insulting him and he's insulting me, we're leaving you out of this. When the Indian and
That's fine.
Pakistani get at it, the Brits should not get involved between India and Pakistan. There's bad history in that.
That is true. That is true. I think we steer way away.
You're the cause of the problem.
I support Air India here because there is a commercial case for them to fly Bombay, Melbourne, Bombay, Sydney, Delhi, Amsterdam. PI has no commercial case to fly to Paris. But I'm surprised that Air India did this.
PIA struggles to have a commercial justification to exist. Anything that derives from further from that is questionable anyway. So let's not digress.
All
let's
right.
go back to private sector profitable airlines.
Absolutely. So we've got, and we're talking of homelands and adopted homelands, and we've got 7-8 minutes left here. So we're going to go back to one of Sean's adopted homelands, Ghana, and talk about Africa World Airlines. Big team coming down for AviaDev as well, which is great, and a profitable private airline that a lot of people, it's got a very grandiose name, but it's not the world's biggest fleet or anything like that. But they have announced that they're going to launch flights to Ouagadougou in Burkina Faso from the 3rd of June, 3 times a week as a starting point. One that was always on your list, Sean? It wasn't served under your time, was it?
It wasn't, but it was on our list. Again, during my time over there, for those who don't know, my first background was I wrote the business plan and I was the launch chief operations officer for Africa World Airlines. Then I was away for 6 years. Then I went back there for another 2.5 years. And during my second term over there, our main focus was on growth and partnerships and so forth. We had potentially Wagga on our list. It was lower down in priorities. That has changed right now, I think. And I think the primary reason for this is the lack of competition. Faso in general has become isolated from much of the rest of the world due to political choices made by their current administration. Some love them, some don't. I'm neutral. However, while the documented traffic for Wagga to Accra is 20,000 passengers a year, give or take last year, we actually do see a significant number of passengers who come through the land border into Tamale in particular in northern Ghana. And at AWA, we used to estimate that on weekends, up to 8 to 10% of our flight actually used to be Burkinabe coming down to catch flights from Tamale, or whether it's to Accra or from Accra onward to the rest of the world. And so this is a flight that is looking to fill that. It's going to be 3 times a week. It's going to be middle of the day. So it's 10 o'clock departure from Accra, arriving 11:30 in Wagga. Again, this has not been officially announced, by the way. Let's clarify this. There have been leaks by the airport authority. There have been leaks by the Ghana embassy in Burkina. There have been leaks all over the place, but AWA has not made a formal announcement. But through sources within the airline, we are able to confidently comment that the flight would likely depart at 10 a.m. from Accra, 11:30 into Wagga, 12 from Wagga, 13:30 into Accra. That's important because the flight provides a two-way feed to and from Lagos. So in addition to the Accra market, which is 20,000, there's a Lagos market and Abuja market, which combine for another 6,000 plus passengers. And with 3 times a week on an Embraer 145, your cost is very low. And this is the perfect kind of market that I've always maintained, that the Embraer 145 can be viable in a market with as low as 7 ppdw if you're just operating it out and back. Operating 2 to 3 times a week, even if you want to get even lower than 7, if you triangulate it with another destination. Yields are decent, market is there. There will be a stimulation of the direct market with these flights, which will pull the traffic away from the passengers using the road transaction via Tamale. I think it's a low risk entry into a market. I think the biggest risk on this is going to be political risk, which is that ensuring that Ghana and Burkina remain friendly enough, which I think is something that the current new president in Ghana and the leader in Burkina Faso have shown a willingness to be friendly outside of a tension-filled ECOWAS framework. The bilateral relationship remains strong. Ghana's got to use its position as being a bordering state with Burkina Faso to help connect Burkina to the world. And I think it's an interesting strategic move, and I think it will, whether successful or not, the risk is very low, so it's a smart thing to do. You've got to grow, and AWA has not grown effectively 5 years since the COVID pandemic. It's been growing back to where it was in 2019, but it still hasn't exceeded 2019 figures since I was there. So this is an important step towards at least starting that way on the revenue front, if not on the passenger numbers front.
Yeah, great to see them continuing to expand and all the rest of it. And I think, like you say, we could be quite confident on that one. Yeah, Behramjee, go.
Regards to the Accra-Ouagadougou route, the passenger numbers is 20,000 passengers last year, whereas the year prior, 2023, it was 19,000. So a decent small to medium-sized market. Majority of those passengers are flying either via Abidjan or via Lomé. But Sean, I remember seeing Air Burkina Faso, they fly to Accra 2 times a week in conjunction with Abidjan. Am I correct?
Air Burkina is what they do on one day to the next is up in the air. So that's why I'm saying Air
I saw
Burkina
it
is
on
in
their
flux.
timetable a couple of months ago. That's why.
But Air Burkina, AWA used to have a partnership with Air Burkina. They started, they stopped, their management changed, the government changed, the aircraft changed. They are who they are. I can't really say much, but if AWA went head to head with Air Burkina, they will eat them for lunch.
Yes, today the Burkina presidency announced on LinkedIn that they bought a brand new E90 LR.
Well, there's no such thing as a brand new E90 because they've stopped making them like 6 years ago.
Well, for them,
it would be a new to them.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll watch this space. Okay, we're going to close up very shortly. There was a couple of other bits. So Kenya Airways schedule updates. Do we want to cover that now? Is that too in-depth to do in the short time we've got? Do you want to do a deeper dive, or are you going to go through?
Things.
Go on,
Nothing big.
Talk us through it.
Number one, which actually caught me by surprise a couple of nights ago, is that they've quietly opened for sale a new Fifth Freedom route in Africa, which is Douala to Abidjan. So the Douala flights, which have been reduced to 3 times a week instead of 5, and operating at a standardized timing, it's overnight from Nairobi, so departure Nairobi after midnight. So it's flying Nairobi, Douala, Abidjan 3 times a week with full Fifth Freedom traffic rights. So they'll be competing with Air Cote d'Ivoire on the Douala to Abidjan, Abidjan to Douala route. But unlike Air Cote d'Ivoire, Kenya Airways will be the only non-stop operator because Air Cote d'Ivoire flies from Douala to Abidjan and then another stop in Abuja. But the problem is Kenya Airways' timing on Douala Abidjan is departing Douala at 3:30 or 3:45 in the morning. So that may be inconvenient for local point-to-point passengers. On the way back, it's no problem. But on the way to Abidjan, if people don't like stopping in Abuja, then it's a very convenient option for them, 2 hours, 45 minutes. As a result of this, Abidjan gets increased from 4 times a week to a daily operation with a split schedule. So do I think it will work? I don't think so, to be honest. Douala has not been a good performer for Kenya Airways over the years. If Kenya Airways needs to expand other places and needs to use the plane, I would suggest them suspending Douala altogether, because there's no point extending this route by another 2 hours, 45 minutes to fly to Abidjan. I would look at increasing some other cities in East or Southern Africa with the 737 instead of flying to Douala and extending to Abidjan. That's my take on it.
Gotcha. Sean, happy with that?
I think KQ is rejigging their entire West African network, so I think this may be one of multiple steps. We saw last month how they've changed their Accra schedules around, changed Freetown, changed Dakar, and I think this is just one of multiple steps in there. I haven't been able to get in touch with Martin, unfortunately, to check what the bigger picture would be. I've sent him a couple of messages, but I guess he's been busy. But yeah, I'm sure we'll get more of an answer from KQ as it plays out. But I think it's just one route in part of a larger West and Central Africa network reshuffle. And I think some of this may also be driven by the Rwanda situation, because Rwanda's cut a lot of those routes, and KQ might be seeing opportunities in some of these markets based upon Rwanda's withdrawal. So I won't pretend to know specifically what their thinking is. I'd usually talk to them. And hopefully, before we come back next month, Martin, reply to my messages. Thanks.
I hate to say this, Sean, but you did reply to me this morning. It must be you, I'm afraid.
My questions were a bit more
Yes.
in depth in terms of
Bit more
based on
probing.
such and
How do you
such
know?
market. What do you think of this and this? Yeah.
How do you know? Maybe I'm learning after all these episodes with you guys.
And also-
Maybe it's
Maybe you
filtering
are.
through.
And also,
Maybe you are.
The
Martin?
incremental,
I'm angry with you then.
and also
We
the
know he's listening.
JFK flights on a summer seasonal basis, they have been reduced from 10 times a week to a daily flight. I assume that's because of the engine issues they're having with the 787s. So basically, one dedicated 787, which was used to increase the frequency from 7 to 10 weekly, has been removed, which is a sensible thing to do. Operating a daily flight is fine. It serves the capacity and demand requirements on this route, even in high summer season. So they are playing it safe. They don't want any major network disruptions for the upcoming high summer season. Yeah,
Yeah, let's watch
those are
and
the
see.
only
So
schedule changes that were announced in the last month.
So we've covered loads today. The only other topic, which I think we will cover next month because it is a rumor mill anyway, was there's been a lot of talk from SAA about starting flights to USA, about increasing fleet from 20 to 50 in 3 years, getting investment. There's loads of things. Maybe that's a topic we can dive into in a bit of depth next month just to see exactly where they're up to, whether this is hot air or there is some opportunities. Keep your powder dry, Sean. I can see that you're getting excited here.
If
you were
anyone
on the
really
radio
wants,
last night.
go to my LinkedIn. Exactly. I was on the radio in South Africa last night. I had about 20-25 minutes discussing exactly this. So I'll post the link on my LinkedIn. And if anyone wants to listen to that, listen to me rant about South African Airways on LinkedIn.
Yeah, and I can put that link in the show notes. So just if you're listening, go to the show notes directly from there. You can go straight on to have a listen to that as well. And that saves us going through that little bit for now. But of course, there could be some more info between now and then. Yeah, thank you both as always. Thank you, Behramjee and Sean. Thanks for bringing the numbers, my friends, and the analysis and educating us all. I know there's so many listeners out there that really do enjoy this every month and look forward to it. If you did and you are out there and you did enjoy the conversation, hit share it with somebody in your network you think would enjoy listening. We know we're an acquired taste and we're very specific, but we're offering something that you can't get anywhere else.
Like and subscribe.
Yeah, we haven't got the budget for one of those buttons actually, Sean, but we'll get there maybe one day. So yeah, over to me to now edit the hour and a half of conversation and get this out and about, and we'll be back for the next episode in May. And until then, thank you all for joining us, and thanks to Behramjee and Sean. Take care. Thanks for joining us. Bye.
Thank you. Thank you.